Hello everyone. So today I'm just going to talk about a way of looking at politics as a division between four different sort of stages of developments, with each one being superior to the last, as in being more reflective of what I see as the question of being, and that means allowing the actualization of the self and the affirmation of, say, humanity or the society in general. And this question of being, I'll get to at the end, as to what an ideal political system would look like. But first we have to consider that there are actually four different stages in which politics are looked at. The first is what I would call a pre-political stage, so that would be stage 0. And while no government could possibly be stage 0, a society could be stage 0. An authority. This would be, for example, say, a post-apocalyptic society, or a hunter-gatherer society, perhaps, where the authority is not political. And what that means is essentially we should, we ought to, is never something that is argued over, you know. If the facts are such, then society will naturally organize itself and comport itself and act in concomitance with those facts. For example, if the deer is over there, we need to go over there and hunt it. We're not going to debate, well, should we hunt the deer? Is it ethical? You know, nor are we going to debate. Well, perhaps we could just eat mushrooms and not eat deers or something like that. These would be like political arguments which seem absurd in such a society. There would still be an authority, but there would not be a political authority. Now, although no government can be stage 0, throughout most of history, the masses of the people did live in a stage 0 sort of way of looking at politics. So, we could think, for example, of some Roman citizen in like 2,000 years ago, and they would look up and see, you know, these senators in their white robes, and they would wonder, you know, I wonder what these people do in the Senate. I wonder what they talk about. I wonder what are the books like that they write, because I can't read, and you know, so I don't know what they're talking about and whatnot. I don't even know what politics is, and not knowing what politics really is indicative of being stage 0. Of course, a person has concerns back then. They want to have food on the table. They want to have shelter. They want to have, they desire, you know, marriage and friendship and other things. But these are like primal sort of desires which are not political. Society at this point is pre-moral. Now, does that mean that there is no pervading morality in society? Not necessarily, but if that morality comes towards stage 0 people, it'll come in the form of, say, a given, that which is taken as for granted. You know, nobody questions the existence of God in a stage 0 sort of society. And that's why I say, although there might be the semblance of morality here, it's more just an acceptance of objective reality than it is a discussion of ethics, such as religion in ancient societies, let's say, among the lower classes. And you could also give, say, the example of the Aztecs or whatever, these people in loincloths looking at, say, these priests doing their sacrifices and whatnot. There was a mystique and a secrecy and an obscurity about what these ruling political classes actually do. So, the same thing with like religious elders discussing morality and whatnot. To the illiterate denizens of the society, it's a mystery what exactly these people are talking about. we move on to the first sort of political stage of society, which would be the moral society. And this is quite different to what a lot of people would assume when they think of a moral society being the first sort of political structure. Because all morality, and I've talked about this in previous videos, so I'm not going to flog that horse anymore, but yes, all concepts of justice, as I mentioned in my last video, are evolved from a relative inequality or relative equality, whichever is the glass half water or half full, this kind of scenario, of the people. It's built upon a power structure, those who have and those who have not. And all concepts of right and wrong, of ethics and morality, are all derived from this sort of struggle for power and whatnot. So once a class of people have established themselves as a class, as those who are above the others, the masses, that implies a morality of sorts, because all arguments in favor of authority, and an argument in favor of authority must be seen as a politic, because when authority is in a stage zero society, it's just taken for granted. The best hunter, the best, the most useful members of society naturally have a sense of authority over those who are not as useful. But say once we get into a structured class, you should listen to me and you should do what I say. That is now a political statement. The existence of a class authority is political, and even if that's all based upon might is right and whatnot, that is the origin of morality. And so we have a moral system, which is the first ever sort of structured class system, which we would have in, say, the Neolithic period. With the advent of agriculture, there would be the labourers, and then there would be, say, those who are in charge, I guess. And I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but there is lots of archaeological evidence and genetic evidence to show that there was an extreme class divide that didn't exist in Mesolithic times, which existed in Neolithic times. For example, in certain Neolithic populations, we can see that there are 10 times more male ancestors in a genetic group than there are female ancestors. Or sorry, the other way around. There are 10 times more female ancestors than male ancestors. And what this means is that the majority of the male population were either dying young or were enslaved. So if they were enslaved, the women would reproduce as concubines, but the men would not reproduce. Or else there was just extreme war and so a large male mortality there. So a combination of these three factors indicate a massive class divide in Neolithic society, which is the origins of a moral system. So we do not live in a stage 1 political society. We live in really a stage 2 society. In a stage 2 political society, discussion is centered around sort of economics and a science of what is right. Now, rather than being, say, the more sort of natural authority, the king is chosen by God, so he ought to be the king and whatnot. We conquered you, so we rule over you. That kind of thing. Like it's a natural moral system based upon a conquering force and a conquered force. But then now we have sort of this sort of covert authority, which is built upon a scientific way of thinking about right and wrong, to the point where a system of ethics, which is constantly debated, is built upon sciences of what is right. That'll be economics, and you could look at things like, say, hypothetically, so-called scientific racism, or something like that, as opposed to the natural feelings people have for foreigners or whatnot. A science of, well, this is what is right. Something that the politicians, that the political leaders themselves adhere to. The politicians aren't just saying, well, I have the power, so I do this and that, and I don't go outside the bounds because I know if I break sort of like these sort of the taboos or whatnot of the society, people are going to come after me and get rid of me, depose me. It's not like that. That's stage one sort of morality. It's more of a science. And so authority is divided up between these sort of units who are operating within the, the sciences of economics and political science and what have you. But in order for this society just to not go totally off the rails, there are sometimes some attempts at creating a stage 3 society. Now, a stage 3 society did exist at many points in the past. I would say it's a perfect example of, say, traditional society. But there are two real strategies that you can do to do this, and it is both of them involve rather than this constant debate about what is right and wrong. And we can see this ourselves in political circles, right and left. It's any political group will constantly tear themselves apart with arguing about reality and whatnot. Think of all the philosophical divides and what have you. One way of getting around this is by accepting a religious dogma. Now, if this arises naturally through, say, certain religious elders and a class of sages and gurus, as what happened in ancient societies, paganism and in Hinduism and such societies, then what you have essentially is the question of being is being addressed, because this religious truth, while it might not be scientifically objective, it contains within itself a holistic and natural way of looking at the world, which science does not have. Every scientific question just leads to more questions, but a somewhat more blinded way of looking at the world in a more singular fashion, as opposed to, say, the constantly debating and questioning of everything that one cannot absolutely confirm, which is the scientific method, essentially. This allows sort of a greater truth than the truth itself. That is the religious truth. And this is evidence as time goes on. As we look back at mythology and see constant how the patterns of the human mind are mapped into the mythological systems and whatnot, and how poetic language has allowed for an understanding of reality that the limitations of grammar typically do not compensate for. But the problem with this is, say, in a society which has already been enlightened by science and what have you, religion becomes almost impossible, and the acceptance of dogma will simply then have to be enforced on the people. Now, this is really like, we could set the clock back a bit, and we could say, we should set the clock back, say, spiritually 300 years, and make all of these sort of more primitive morals and what have you, and change the propaganda system. There'll always be propaganda system, and we can just say, such and such a truth people believed back then was true now. This is basically what conservatives want, like a true conservative, who at this point is more like a reactionary because we've progressed so far. They want like the old-fashioned morality, the old-fashioned system back. But I'm just looking at some animals here. Yeah, in any case, there's also another fashion in which, say, a second-level political system feigns a more advanced sort of state, and that is the turning of, say, the scientific procedure, the scientific method, into a new kind of dogma. And this is essentially what Marxism wanted to do, what it was intending to do. The problem with Marxism is that it's simply wrong. There are two precepts from Hegelian philosophy that became part of Marxism: that history is a progress, and that history is a class war between those who have and those who have not. The second is true. History is a class war, a giant class war. But the first is false, and you can look at my video, Inauthentic and Authentic Historiology, for more information on why this idea that history is a progress, like a great march on, that it's false. But in addition to the Hegelian dialectics, there was then this new idea Marx introduced, which was the idea of the history from below, that the will of the people is responsible for every great historical movement, which is absolute nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. The will of the people has never been more than a stage one political phase. It's always been absolutely moral. And if you look at today's day, the politicians, I've been really circumlocutory here, so it's been 15 minutes to get to this idea. The politicians today argue in a very scientific fashion about economics and what have you. Take immigration, for example. You know, there's the argument for and against immigration are all economic arguments about how is this going to serve us, that is the class that is ruling, or how is it going to go against us, and how should we act accordingly. They talk about things, whenever there's a political issue, the politicians will talk about, among themselves will talk about, you know, equity and sustainability and whatnot. And of course these words have often taken on like sort of a moral character nowadays, even though they're absolutely amoral in their origin. But when the politicians want to convince the people to follow them and believe in what they say, all of the arguments are moral arguments. So the left says, you know, these poor innocent refugees, we must take them in and be, you know, the mother bird spreading our wing across their backs to keep them warm and safe. While the right wing people say, you know, they're violent, they are terrorists, they rape and beat women, so we can't let them in. You know, they have low IQs, and so again, both of these arguments are moral arguments. And the debate between right and left today is a moral debate. But the people who rule over society are Machiavellians. They don't care about morality. But morality is merely a tool used to control the people. I see now this could have been a two-part video. It's a bit long, but I have more to say. Say, for example, Nazi Germany. You know, there's a whole philosophy about tradition and what have you. There was Martin Heidegger's sort of whole philosophy about say looking at history not as a progress, but as sort of in a more authentic fashion, seeing it's really quite circular, and we have not progressed from the traditional society. The traditional society has a lot to say for itself. It was Carl Schmitt's political theory and what have you. Then there's of course the history too, the history of the chosen ones, and a certain tribes of people, you know, and then look at the spiritual ideal of what they were trying to create and what have you. Those ideas would have went over the head of the people, but the argument that won them over was that, you know, an invasive population has poisoned the well, and they've usurped power, and that we need to purge these impure sort of types to create like a beautiful, pure society and what have you. That's a moral argument, and it's the moral argument, not the philosophical argument, the scientific argument. It's the moral argument that wins over the masses. Same thing with communism. There was the whole Hegelian dialectic materialism. There was all the Marxism, Lacantian philosophy and what have you. You know, the idea of equality didn't come from Marx. Marx did not believe in equality. He actually believed in, ironically, that the Germans were superior to everyone else, and that only Germany could be communist. But you know, the idea of equality was added to it and everything. And this idea of equality and you know, sharing the wealth and everything as a moral argument was presented to people, while the historiological sort of worldview was that just would have gone over people's heads. You know, the economics of it would have gone over people's heads. You know, I'm pretty sure that the leaders of communist societies knew full well what they were doing when they did like the Great Leap Forward or the 5-year plans. You know, the 5-year plans were a massive success from the perspective of the people who planned it. From the perspective of history, it's a great mistake, and it's so immoral. How could they do that? But I'm pretty sure that morality was not actually part of what they were thinking. They were a stage 2 society, and they'd already traversed like the whole moral plane. They were past morality, you know. The argument was scientific, not moral. So this sort of acceptance of a dogma is impossible nowadays. It's impossible nowadays because, first of all, we're not going to make society religious again. Religiosity is something that happens naturally. And there are phenomena that take place which make religiosity somewhat inevitable, and maybe sort of a surrogate religiosity forms in our... But widespread holistic religious worldview, a theocracy in other words, is impossible in the Western world. Doesn't be religious if you believe, but society will never be like that.